Welcome to the very first episode of Storytime with Shlaggy, the show where creativity meets cinema on the page. Each week we'll dive into a different genre, from heart-pounding thrillers to gut-busting comedies, gritty westerns to spine-chilling horror, and everything in between. I'll take you through brand new stories crafted in real time, designed to capture the feel, style, and magic of the movies we love. So grab your popcorn, settle in, and let's bring some blockbuster storytelling straight to your ears. Setto, Montana, The Last Draft. Struggling novelist Daniel Cross retreats to an isolated mountain cabin to finish a horror story that could save his failing career. But soon, unsettling signs suggest he isn't alone. Footprints in the snow, cigarette butts on the porch, and pages of his own manuscript appearing outside. As Daniel spirals into paranoia, he becomes convinced a mysterious man is watching him. The horror he writes begins to manifest into his reality, until the line between fiction and sanity disappears. The truth is more terrifying than he imagined. The stalker haunting him is himself, a fractured part of his mind feeding on his isolation. When Daniel finally completes his manuscript, he believes he has broken free, but in the chilling horror climax, he faces his watcher, only to realize he has been both author and monster all along.
Prologue. The divorce lawyer's office smelled faintly of leather and stale coffee. Daniel Cross sat stiffly in the chair, fingers drumming on his knees, eyes fixed on the polished oak desk that separated him from the woman who had once been the center of his life. She looked older than he had remembered, worn around the eyes but resolute, as if the years of disappointment and frustration had carved their story into her very bones. "Daniel," she said evenly, "we need to finalize this. The house, the accounts, everything. We can't keep dragging it out." He swallowed hard. The words felt like cold lead in his chest. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. I know. He hesitated, the weight of years of failure pressing down. "I thought maybe we could fix it." She shook her head gently, a sad, patient gesture. "We've been trying to fix you, Daniel, but some things, they can't be fixed." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel wanted to argue, to plead, to somehow rewrite the ending of his life as he had once rewritten his novels. But the truth sat heavy in his stomach. He had failed. His career had crumbled under the weight of addiction, missed deadlines, and self-doubt. His marriage had crumbled under the weight of the same. And now he was left with nothing but fragments of a life that once seemed so full. Later that morning, Daniel sat in the sterile office of his former publisher. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he spoke with his editor, the same man who had once hailed him as a literal genius. "We need something, Daniel," the editor said, flipping through a stack of rejection letters and overdue manuscripts. "The market's tough, but your name carries weight. You need to give us a book, something new, something dark. People want horror. People want suspense. We're counting on you." Daniel's fingers tapped nervously on the edge of the desk. "I'm trying. I have a story. I just need the right place to write it." "Try a cabin," the editor suggested, almost jokingly, but Daniel caught the gravity in his tone. "Isolation, no distractions. You've done your best work in solitude before. Go just finish it, Daniel." Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. He didn't need to be told twice. The city, the deadlines, the constant judgment of the world, it had all become suffocating. He needed to escape, to hide, to write. He stepped out into the gray morning, the wind biting at his face. The car waited as he drove. The skyscrapers and traffic lights receded behind him, replaced gradually by rolling hills, pine forests, and the promises of isolation. The mountains were quiet. Daniel was finally close to being alone, and for the first time in years, he could hear his own thoughts, unfiltered, waiting to become a story. Chapter 1. Arrival. The mountain road twisted like a serpent, vanishing into walls of pine and the slow fall of snow. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter than he needed to, his knuckles bone white in the gray light of late afternoon. The wipers squealed against the windshield, pushing aside flakes that seemed endless, relentless, a curtain between him and the rest of the world. Isolation. That was the point. In the back seat, the battered typewriter sat beside a half-empty box of notebooks. His suitcase rattled with each bump in the road, and on top of it all, wrapped in a faded scarf, was a framed photograph he hadn't wanted to bring, but just couldn't quite leave behind. The smile still had weight, even after everything. A voicemail echoed in his memory, the voice of his publisher, sharp and impatient. Danny, this is it. Deliver something marketable or don't bother coming back. You've burned through every advance, every excuse, every opportunity. One more book, just one. Please make it count. The words had stung. They still did. But the sting in the alcohol was the only thing keeping him awake as the tires chewed up the road and the snow thickened. By the time he reached the cabin, night was already sinking into the tree line. It stood small and hunched against the storm, a black silhouette at the edge of the woods, half buried in drifts. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney. The caretaker had been gone for weeks, maybe longer. Daniel parked, he cut the engine, and sat in silence. The world out here was smothered. No traffic, no cell service, just wind, whispering through the trees, almost like a warning. Inside the cabin was colder than he had imagined. The walls creaked as if they remembered other winters, harder ones, harsher ones. Dust coated the counters. He flicked the lights, dim, flickering, but alive. He dropped his bag beside the desk near the window, pulled off his gloves, and stared out into the gathering dark. The forest stared back. For a moment he thought he saw movement between the trees, a shadow slipping away, quick as breath. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and saw nothing but the endless white. Just nerves, he had told himself. He unpacked slowly, the typewriter first, placed dead center on the desk, then the notebook stacked in a neat pile. Last, the framed photograph. He set it face down, then turned it back over again, as if ashamed of the gesture of placing it that way. When the fire caught in the hearth, warmth crept into the room, and Daniel poured his first glass of whiskey. He stared at the blank page rolled into the machine, the keys waiting, silent, expectant. He took a breath, touched the first key, and typed a sentence. The cabin was too quiet, and someone was watching him from the trees. Chapter 2. Settling in. Morning came slow, like the mountain was reluctant to let go of night. Daniel woke to the sound of silence so complete it pressed against his eardrums. No cars, no voices, no city hum, just a faint groan of timber and the occasional shift of snow sliding from the roof. He brewed coffee on the rusted stove, pacing while it boiled, his bare feet cold against the warped floorboards. The cabin smelt of dust and ash, as though no one had truly lived there in years. He told himself that was fine, better even. At the desk he arranged his tools with care as though order might summon inspiration. The typewriter at the center, a stack of notebooks to one side, pencils to the other. Beside the window he set the photograph, though he kept turning it face down whenever he caught himself staring too long. The forest loomed beyond the glass, pines black against white snow, their branches sagging under the weight. He thought of them as sentinels, keeping watch. The longer he stared, the more convinced he became that the trees leaned closer, inch by inch, as if they were listening. By noon, he had written a few pages, nothing special. A character sketch of a man alone in a cabin, haunted by the idea of someone watching him. The words came stiff at first, then looser, as the whiskey helped untie the knots in his brain. He stepped outside to clear his head. The air was sharp, biting. Snow crunched beneath his boots, crisp and loud in the stillness. He scanned the tree line. Nothing moved, yet the feeling persisted. That odd pull at the back of his neck, the sensation of being seen. He shook it off, retreating inside. He lit the fireplace again, poured yet another drink, and told himself the isolation was already working. The story was beginning to take shape. Night fell fast. The shadows gathered early, filling the corners of the room. Daniel sat hunched over the typewriter, fingers striking keys in bursts, then pausing to listen. The silence was so deep it felt alive. He laughed once nervously and said aloud, drunk, "Just to hear something." "Get a grip, Danny. It's just a cabin. It's just you." But he turned back to the window, and the reflection in the glass didn't look entirely like him. Chapter 3. The First Omen. The third morning dawned, gray and heavy, snow falling in a steady curtain outside the cabin windows. Daniel woke stiff on the couch, his neck aching from the angle. He had fallen asleep with the typewriter still in front of him. A half-finished page rolled in place. Coffee first, always coffee. He shuffled into the stove, poured grounds into the dented percolator, and stared absently through the frosted glass of the back door. Something didn't look right. He leaned closer. Footprints. He blinked hard, rubbed at the glass, still there. Pressed deep into the snow, a trail of boot prints led from the tree line straight to the porch. He opened the door cautiously, the cold rushing in like a slap. The prints were sharp, fresh. Whoever had made them hadn't been gone long. He followed them with his eyes, heart thudding, and they stopped right at the porch steps. And then nothing. No tracks leading away. Daniel stepped out, breath fogging in the icy air. He crouched, touched the nearest print with his hand. Solid. Real solid. Not an animal, not some trick of melting ice, boots almost the same size as his own, yet unfamiliar. He straightened and scanned the trees. They stood motionless, heavy with snow, black against the pale morning. Nothing stirred. No wind, no movement. The caretaker, maybe. That had to be it. Come to check the place, or drop off supplies, or what else? But why knock on the door? Why stop at the porch and then just leave? He swallowed hard and told himself it didn't matter. Inside, he locked the door, then checked the windows, then without realizing it, checked the locks again. And again. By afternoon, he had convinced himself it was nothing, a trick of the weather, his imagination filling in the blanks, the alcohol. He sat at the typewriter, forcing himself to write. The story spilled forward. A man in a cabin, snowed in, haunted by the feeling he wasn't alone. The words came easier than they should have, almost too easily, as if someone else were whispering them to him, line by line. When night fell, he sat by the fire, reading over what he had written. He caught himself glancing toward the door every few minutes, listening for footsteps in the snow. But the night was still silent. Too silent. Chapter 4. The Cigarette. The storm passed overnight, leaving the world bright and cruelly silent. The sky was a blank white sheet, and the snow outside the cabin glittered like crushed glass. Daniel woke up late, head heavy from the whiskey. He rubbed his face, shuffled to the door, and cracked it open for air. That was when he saw it right away. On the porch railing, half buried in the snow, lay a cigarette butt. The paper browned and curling, ash still clinging to the end. Fresh. Daniel froze. He didn't smoke. Not once. He glanced around the porch, scanning the snow for more tracks, but there was nothing. No prints this time. No path leading to or from the cabin. Just that one cigarette sitting there as if it was left behind for him to find. His throat dried. The caretaker again? But why smoke on the porch and not knock? Why leave without a word? He picked up with 2 fingers and dropped it into the fire. The paper hissed, then curled into black nothing. All day his focus refused to hold. He sat at the typewriter, staring at the blank page, hands poised above the keys, but not moving. His story pressed at the back of his mind, restless and patient, like it wanted to be told faster than he could actually type it. Finally, he forced himself to begin. The man on the porch smoked a cigarette and left the ash as proof that he had been there, watching. The words appeared almost on their own. He wasn't sure if he had written them or if the machine had pulled them from him. That night, he drank a lot more than usual. The wind scraped at the windows, but it was the silence between gusts that unnerved him most. He sat by the fire, glass in hand, trying to read his own words, but the letters seemed to shift on the page if he stared too long. The cigarette butt wouldn't leave his mind. Someone had been here, standing just feet away from where he slept, watching. Before bed, Daniel locked the doors again, then checked them twice. He left the fire burning low as if the glow itself might keep the dark at bay. In the quiet, he thought he heard a faint exhale, the sound of someone smoking, just beyond the window glass. He held his breath and listened, but the cabin gave him nothing back. Chapter 5. Pages in the Snow. The morning air was knife-sharp when Daniel opened the cabin door. He squinted against the glare of the snow, half asleep, hungover, a mug of coffee steaming in his hand. And he froze. Something fluttered against the doorframe, pinned by the tip of a rusted nail, a single sheet of paper. He plucked it free, fingers trembling before his eyes. It was his writing, his style, his typewriter's font, clear and unmistakable. He read. The man woke to find a page nailed to his door, proof that his visitor had not only been close enough to touch the cabin, but bold enough to leave him a message. Daniel's breath clouded the air. His eyes darted to the trees, the porch, the unbroken sweep of snow. No tracks, no signs of anyone have come or gone. But the words, God, the words. He hadn't written this. Not yet. He stumbled inside, clutching the page like evidence. He dropped it on the desk beside the typewriter and tore through the stack of paper he had already written. No duplicate, no draft. This scene didn't exist anywhere else. His stomach turned. Someone had written it for him. Or worse, someone had written it ahead of him. By afternoon, he had convinced himself of a half-dozen explanations. A prank left by the caretaker, a cruel joke by his agent, even his own sleepwalking hands creating pages he couldn't remember, but none of it made any sense. The typewriter was silent. Its keys were cold. That night he stared at the page until the fire burned low. His whiskey glass went untouched. He wanted the alcohol, needed it, but the thought of dulling his senses while someone was out there kept him sober. When he finally crawled into bed, the silence pressed closer than ever, as if the woods themselves had moved up against the walls. He dreamed of paper drifting down like the snow, covering the cabin in words he hadn't yet written. Chapter 6. The Calls. The night had been restless. Wind whipped the cabins with a low, kneeling howl, rattling the windows and stirring the fire into uneasy flickers. Daniel lay in bed, half awake, listening to the storm. Every groan of timber, every scrape of branches sounded amplified, deliberate. Then the phone rang. The cabin phone. Long, silent, jangled with the shrill, urgent tone that sliced through the quiet. Daniel bolted upright, heart hammering. Hello, as he grasped, grabbing the receiver with one hand, the other pressed against his chest. Silence. Then a faint exhale, long, slow, labored. He yanked the phone away. Hello? Who is this? Nothing. Just the faintest whisper of low breathing. So low he wondered if he was imagining it. He dropped the receiver, fingers trembling. The fire popped, sending sparks dancing across the room. He stared at the desk, at the page he'd found pinned to the door, then at the typewriter, then back to the phone. It rang again. This time he didn't move. It rang and rang and rang until the ringing seemed to echo from the walls themselves. Finally, silence. He sank into the chair, pressing his forehead to the desk. Something was wrong. He couldn't explain it. Every rational thought screamed from him to leave the cabin, to call someone, to get help. But the manuscript. He couldn't abandon the manuscript. Not now. His career, reputation, and identity were at stake. He couldn't leave the frigid, perplexing cabin. He poured a stiff drink, gulped it down, and tried to focus. His fingers hovered over the typewriter keys, trembling. He forced himself to write. The phone rang. He answered. There was breathing, and nothing else. The visitor was closer than ever. The words felt heavy, almost alive, as if the page itself had taken a breath. The wind outside died. The storm's edge had passed, leaving a quiet so complete it pressed against his ears. Daniel strained to hear anything, a footstep, a creak, a whisper, but the cabin gave him nothing. And yet he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was moving just beyond the walls. Chapter 7. Reality Bleeds. Daniel awoke to the sound of scratching. At first he thought it was the wind, branches scraping against the cabin walls, but the rhythm was wrong, deliberate, methodical. Something was circling the house. He froze, listening. His hands gripped the edge of the desk. He thought of the footprints, the cigarette, the page pinned to the door. All the signs he had tried to rationalize suddenly felt impossibly real. Shaking, he opened his notebook, searching for some anchor. He had been writing feverishly for days now, pounding out scenes of a man stalked in a cabin, hunted by some unseen force, but the words had begun to change. He remembered writing about a claw mark on the door, but when he looked at the cabin's front, fresh scratches marred the wood, jagged and uneven. He staggered back. His typewriter had produced the scene before it happened, or perhaps it had conjured it into existence. The idea was unthinkable, but there it was, proof under his eyes. Daniel's breathing became shallow. He glanced at the window. Shadows moved across the snow. Just beyond the glass, though he could see no figure, he swore the branches bent to his presence, leaning closer and peering in. The story was no longer on the page. It was alive. Every word he wrote, every scene he imagined, manifested. He had created his own hunter. He had created the terror. Hands trembling, he typed again. The man thought he was safe, though he was not. The shadow waited beyond the glass, always watching, ever so patient. The sound of footsteps outside his door made him flinch. He bolted to the locked door, pressing his ears against it. Crunch, crunch, moving in a deliberate circle. He yanked open the door, scanning the snow. Nothing. The prints from yesterday were gone. The cigarette buried under fresh snowfall. No evidence that anyone had been there. Daniel's mind raced. Sleepwalking, hallucination, madness. He didn't know anymore. Every explanation felt inadequate and weak. And yet the fear was tangible, real enough to taste, to feel crawling under the skin. By the fire, he wrote until his fingers bled, the typewriter keys clattering like machine gun fire. Each sentence felt like a rope tightening around him, trapping him in his own creation. The words blurred, shadows merged with the text on the page. When he looked up, he swore he saw movement behind the window, the silhouette of a man, pale, faceless, and watching. And then the wind stopped suddenly, silent again. But Daniel knew deep down that it was not gone. It had only just arrived. Chapter 8. The Mirror. The storm passed, but Daniel barely noticed. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten more than a crust of bread in a few days. His mind felt frayed, buzzing. The silence of the cabin was louder than any other noise. He couldn't stop writing. Even when he tried, his hands kept drifting to the typewriter, pounding out sentences that felt less like creation and more like transcription, as if he were recording something that already happened, and already happened somewhere else. By late afternoon, the fire guttered low, and Daniel wandered the cabin in a haze. His eyes caught the ladder to the attic. He hadn't recognized the attic before. For a long moment he stared at it, a cold dread spreading through his chest. The idea of climbing into the dark above filled him with nausea, but something compelled him, and a whisper at the back of his mind, "You need to see." He climbed the ladder. The attic smelled of dust and rot, wood swollen with damp. He swept his flashlight across the forgotten trunks and moth-eaten blankets, the light finally catching on a tall shape leaning against the wall. A mirror. Its glass was cracked, a jagged vein running through the center. The surface was so dust-caked he barely recognized himself at first. His reflection stared back, pale and hollow-eyed, a stranger in his own skin. Daniel raised a hand to the glass. The reflection lifted his hand in unison, fractured by the crack. For one wild instant, he thought the man in the mirror was delayed, just slightly, like an actor missing his cue. He stumbled back, heart thundering, smacking his face. That's when he noticed a leather-bound notebook resting on the floor behind the mirror, half hidden beneath an old sheet. He knelt, brushed it clean, and opened it. His stomach had turned. Page after page filled with his own handwriting, notes, observations, entries cataloging every single thing that had happened since he'd arrived. The footprints, the cigarette, the page in the snow, and even the phone call. He flipped faster, hands shaking. At the back, he found lines describing things that hadn't happened yet. The man will see himself in the mirror. The man will know the stalker has always been near. His breath came shallow, ragged. He shut the notebook hard, staring at it as if it might burst into flames itself. "No," he whispered. This can't be me." But the evidence was undeniable. His own words, his own hand. The mirror's fractured reflection stared back, lips moving just a half a second behind his own. And Daniel wondered with a terror colder than the mountain air outside if he had been really the one leaving the clues all along. Chapter 9. The Storm. By evening, the storm returned, howling down the mountainside like an angry beast. The wind rattled the cabin walls, shaking the windows as if trying to force its way inside this time. Snow piled against the door, drifts climbing like small hills. Daniel sat at the typewriter, candlelight flickering over the pages. His hands trembled, smudged with ink and ash, moving faster than he could think. Every word he wrote felt like a rope tightening around his mind, but he couldn't stop. He had to finish the story. He had to. His stomach begging, pleading for hunger to be satisfied, yet it was only being filled with the burn of well bourbon and anxiety. The notebook from the attic lay open beside him, but the pages offered no comfort, only the horrifying suggestion that he was the author of both his nightmare and his pursuer. He drank more whiskey than he should, spilling drops onto the desk, and laughed at himself. Nervous laughter, high-pitched crackling in the small room. "You'll be fine," he muttered. "Just finish it, Danny. Just finish it, and it ends." The storm slammed into the cabin with renewed fury. The wind rattled the roof, sending vibrations down into the floorboards. He froze. Footsteps again, slow, deliberate, crunching over snow. He jumped to his feet, axe in hand, and ran to the windows. Nothing. No footprints, no shadow. He was alone. But the sound persisted, moving around the cabin, circling him and teasing him. He slammed boards against the window, nailing them with shaking fingers. He stacked chairs in the front of the doors, barricading himself against an enemy he wasn't sure even existed. Yet even as he worked, he typed. Words poured out of him in fits. Each sentence was a desperate plea for survival. The man knew the stalker was inside the cabin. The stalker knew the man was also inside. They circled each other unseen. One would strike first, one would survive, and one would not. Hours passed. He didn't eat, didn't drink. The storm howled, the fire spluttered, the candle burned low, and then silence. The snow had stopped abruptly. The wind had died. The cabin was still again. Daniel's heart pounded. He lowered the axe, leaning on it, chest heaving. He looked at the mirror on the wall. The cracked reflection began staring back at him, and for the first time he understood. The storm, the footsteps, the smoke, the footprints, all of it had been him. And yet somehow it didn't matter. He kept writing, comfortable, feverishly, relentless, until the night bled into day and the pages filled the cabin like snowdrifts, white and suffocating. Because he had to finish the story. He had to, before it had finished him. Chapter 10, The Stalker. The fire had been low to embers, and the storm had passed into an oppressive silence. Daniel crouched by the typewriter, fingers bleeding from frantic typing, heart hammering so violently it felt as if it might burn through his chest. Movement again. This time it was slow, purposeful. A shadow filtered across the wall, across the floor. Daniel gripped the axe tighter, knuckles white, sweat stinging his eyes, breathing as if air no longer existed. "Show yourself," he shouted. His voice cracked in terror and echoed unnaturally in the cold, empty cabin. The shadow paused. Then from the corner of the room, a figure stepped forward. Tall, pale, hollow eyes, motionless and silent. Daniel's breath caught. He raised the axe, trembling, getting ready to swing. Who? What? The figure moved toward him, slow, deliberate, and calculated. Daniel swung the axe wildly. The blade collided with nothing. A mirror shattered, the room spun, blood rushed to his head, and then he saw it. The stalker, the shadow, the terror he had been running from, his own reflection. The realization hit like ice water. Every footprint, every cigarette butt, every page in the snow, every whispered breath over the phone, he had done it all. He had been the hunter and the hunted. Daniel screamed, crying, trying to exorcise this demon that had finally come full circle. The reflection mirrored him perfectly, except it was exaggerated, monstrous. The eyes darker and hollow, the lips curling in a grin that was his own. He swung the axe again, smashing shards of mirror across the floor. Blood splattered. He didn't care if it was his or the reflection's. He stumbled backward, chest heaving. The notebook from the attic lay open beside him. He grabbed it, reading feverishly. The stalker was always the man. The man is the stalker. A laugh escaped him, wild and broken. It's me, he whispered. I am him. He began frantically yelling vulgar insults at himself, pulling hair, screaming as if this was the moment he finally come to terms with his failed career, his failed marriage, and his new enemy, himself. The fire flickered. The shadows of the shards danced across the walls, twisting and withering. His reflection smiled wider as Daniel spiraled into the arms of his demons. Daniel sank to the floor, axe falling from his hands. He began clutching his head. Finish the story. He muttered almost to himself, almost pleading with the typewriter, begging it. And he typed feverishly, relentlessly again, until every ounce of his mind was poured onto the page, every shred of terror recorded, every moment of madness transcribed. The cabin fell silent. The snow outside lay undisturbed. Daniel, broken and spent, collapsed over the typewriter, staring at the final page. He was both the creator and the victim, the hunter and the hunted. The story was complete, and the stalker had always been him. Chapter 11, The Return. Daniel returned to the city, manuscript in hand, greeted by the hum of ordinary life. The apartment smelt faintly of coffee and dust, grounding yet hollow. He unpacked carefully, typewriter, notebooks, the last pages of the manuscript stacked neatly on the desk again. The mountains were behind him. The storm was behind him. He told himself it was over. Days passed with a fragile semblance of normalcy. Grocery runs, emails, brief conversations. He tried to write again. Simple notes, reminders, short stories unrelated to the cabin. Yet the apartment felt wrong. Shadows lingering in corners, reflections hesitated in mirrors. Occasionally, a page appeared on his desk that he didn't remember creating. One evening, Daniel paused, a brisk sensation of fear, the same fear he felt when unraveling the cabin, nervously sniffing the air. The familiar cabin smell lingered again. Damp pine mixed with the acrid tang of cigarette smoke. It wrapped around him like a memory he couldn't shake. He stepped closer to the mirror and whispered, trembling, "It's just me, right?" His reflection smiled. The typewriter began moving on its own keys, clattering violently. Words formed on a blank page. Daniel's vision blurred. His chest tightened. He tried to stand, but his legs gave way. His arms trembled as he reached for the desk, for the typewriter, for anything, but the words felt distant, unreal, slipping from him. This was not Daniel Cross. All the while he could feel the reflection in the mirror observing him, calm and patient. Its smile was faint, eerie, and possibly still. It did not speak. It did not move. It merely watched as Daniel's strength drained, his body weakening with every shallow breath. Blood seeped from his hands, smearing across the typewriter keys. Daniel slumped forward, one last effort to lift his failing head. His vision narrowed, the room tilting and the cabin smell returning. The pine, the smoke, it all filled his senses, overpowering everything. And through it all, the reflection smiled, not his smile, but something else. Something inhuman, patient, victorious. Daniel's chest rose and fell once, twice, and then reluctantly stopped. The typewriter fell silent. Pages lay thrown across the floor, blotched with blood. In the mirror, the reflection remained, watching, eternal, like it had always been there and always would be. The apartment grew cold and hollow, echoing the lonely stillness of the cabin. Then, out of the silence, a single key struck. A fresh page waited in the carriage. Each keystroke landed with a cruel patience, the seconds dragging like hours. The words appeared, not in ink, but in Daniel Cross's warm, bleeding crimson. Letter by letter, line by line, it formed only 3 words. The last draft. Hope you guys enjoyed the story. Took a long time to write it out. Obviously, had assistance from Chatgpt, but a lot of it was 50-50. The story, everything like that. Just needed help kind of putting it together, putting it into words. Shout out to the producer, Yanni K, helping me out here with this. He's not on the mic here for this one. This is the new segment. I hope you guys enjoy it. Then the next story you're going to hear is going to be from Yanni K himself. And yeah, let us know how you feel about this. Cue the outro.